Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here and to be back in Alberta. I have long roots in Alberta. You may not know that. My alma mater is a university slightly north of here that you may have heard of. Did my undergrad and my master's degree there, and my great-grandparents were settlers in eastern Alberta. And my first job, and how I put myself through my first degree, was actually running the Hire a Student program in the Edmonton area. So I don't know if any of you remember the Hire a Student program. And that's where I first started to get interested in this idea of student employment and connecting students to the world of work. So that was way back in the day in the Hire a Student program. Great training ground, great opportunity. So it's lovely to be back here. So the first bit is, what are we talking about when we're discussing work-integrated learning specifically as a subset of experiential? And this is a definition that has been developed after much debate and discussion by the National Association, which is CWIL, Cooperative Education and Work-Integrated Learning, Canada. And the association, after a great deal of consultation and discussion amongst our members are all post-secondary institutions across the country, as well as talking to other jurisdictions, our Australian colleagues in New Zealand, other jurisdictions that do a lot of work-integrated learning. And we came up with this definition, and I'm going to break it down a little bit for you because there's some key components of it that help us understand how work-integrated learning is a subset of experiential learning broadly. So first of all, it is a type of experiential learning. We'll just say that right off the bat. But it really has the intention where the site of learning is in a workplace or a practice setting. So there very much is that intentionality around an engagement of workplaces and practice settings as part of what's going on, as part of the educational endeavor. And as such, it really is a partnership between the academic institution, the student, and that workplace setting. So it really is at least those three partners. It can occur at a program level, a course level, and it's not just about getting a job. People hear the word work and they think, oh, it's just about a job, I'm not interested because I'm about more than that. But it's about, yes, employability. Employability is one of the learning outcomes, and how students approach that and think about that and get clarity around that is one of the outcomes, but it's not the only one. Because in so doing and in engaging, there is the development of a whole range of personal capabilities and the capacity for lifelong learning. Okay? So that's usually a good starting point because I don't know about you, but we can be engaged for a long time just in this question of definitions and what are we talking about. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about work-integrated learning. Across the country, we also have identified 9 different types of work-integrated learning in general categories. And the National Association represents colleges as well as universities and polytechnics. So we have apprenticeships, cooperative education, internships, entrepreneurship, service learning, applied research, mandatory practicum or clinical placements, field placements, and work experience. And all of these are defined as well, and they can be found on the CWIL website. And if anyone's coming to my workshop this afternoon, I'll have those definitions broken down for you, get into them in greater detail if you wish. But basically, service learning, for example, if it is engaging that activity in a workplace setting, in a practice setting, and some of the learning outcomes are about professional development, career exploration, we would consider it a form of work-integrated learning. Now, not all service learning necessarily does that, and it is context-specific, right? So those are the types of work-integrated learning. So when we have calls across the country from organizations like BHER that Drew mentioned and others for every student, every graduate having a form of work-integrated learning, this is what we are suggesting would be the map that could be followed as what does that mean and how could that come to be. And cooperative education is, of course, one form. My university, University of Waterloo, it's the dominant form of work-integrated learning that we have at the University of Waterloo. We placed close to 22,000 students last year in paid co-op work terms. That represents 72% of the undergraduate student body engaged in cooperative education. So it's the dominant form at my institution. It may or may not be at this institution, and each university or college has its own cultural makeup of the kinds of work-integrated learning that it wants to support. So why does quality matter? And I think Drew already spoke to it very much. There are calls for expansion of this kind of work across the board, and everyone wants to get in on it. Everyone's looking at Certainly we're seeing this at a national level, leading groups trying to define work-integrated learning in ways that maybe we don't think are going to set the stage for quality, but could set the stage for expedience number counting to get to that 100% goal, and that's what we're quite concerned about. We want quality because what's the point of doing this? Is it just to have a bunch of students doing some activity, or is it really about getting those learning outcomes that we want so those students can make the difference that we need them to make, as was evidenced in that beautiful video? That's what we're after here, not just a bunch of activity for activity's sake. And so I think that's why these quality indicators are really important. I think it's also important that we're clear on what we're talking about. We can define these things so we can start doing some really more robust research. There's a lot of evidence already that is there, definitely, but there could be more. And there could be more around what kind of levers can we pull to make certain things work more effectively across systems. And if we don't have some standard approaches, it's really hard to make those conclusions. So collecting data and also guidance, building capacity, training and development is needed across the board as well. So this is why I think quality is important. And up until the fall, until we developed this quality wheel framework, there wasn't one that was really established in Canada. So in the fall, I joined the University of Waterloo in September, and I have the great privilege of working with a fabulous team of people there, including a research center called WATCASE, the Waterloo Center for the Advancement of Cooperative Education. And my colleagues there, Pretti and Dana Church, we developed a white paper, the Quality Wheel Framework, and the link to that white paper is on the slide. After extensive literature review and extensive consultation, and that was formed the basis for the development of this white paper. And I would encourage you to go to the link. I'm going to go through the framework at a very high level in this presentation, but what's, I think, a very valuable resource in the white paper are pages and pages and pages of references, because we really embedded everything in the literature and in evidence and in research that's been done globally in this space. So the references are really helpful, I think, if you want to dig in further and look at your own practice and what is important to you. Okay, so let's start on what the framework is about. So we started with acknowledging that in this work, there are 5 key stakeholders. There are, of course, students, the host organization or employer or wherever the student is going to be landing for their experience, the educator, and I include everybody who's engaged in making these programs work as educators. Faculty members, curriculum developers, practitioners. We are all part of an educational endeavor. Governments, and Drew just mentioned governments and their interest in this work and why they also have a stake in this. And the federal government has just come up with $683 million in the latest budget to support work-integrated learning, so they have a stake in it, for sure. And institutions, of course, have a stake. So there are 5 key stakeholders. But we also acknowledge that these stakeholders have advocates. So in the case of students, there are student bodies, national student associations, parents are often advocates of students and what their interests are. There are advocates for institutions, Universities Canada, for example, or CICAN in the college sector. Employers have advocates. BHER is one, for example. Canadian Chamber of Commerce is another one. There are a number of different advocates. So there are the stakeholders, and their advocates are key in this space. The first area of the quality framework is that each of those stakeholders will have their own aims. So this framework is AAA star. So we found words that started with the letter A, mainly so that I could remember them. So the first one are aims. What are the aims of each of these stakeholders? Because each stakeholder has their own set of aims, right? And I'm going to go through these at, very broad strokes, appreciating that there is huge diversity and complexity within each of these stakeholders and each of these aims. So if we start with the student, here are some typical aims. This is what the research shows us. Typical reasons that students have for being interested in and engaging in work-integrated learning. They want opportunities to have hands-on learning. They want to apply theory into practical settings. They want to develop these set of capabilities that will help them with their employability. They want to get some career clarity by trying different contexts, building networks. And in some cases where these are paid experiences, for example, in cooperative education, it helps them offset the cost of their education. So here are some aims. And again, I want to pause and just reference that our student bodies are incredibly diverse. These may have a different lens if you're an Indigenous student, if you're a student with accommodations, if you're an international student, if you're a graduate student, if you're a student from a lower socioeconomic standing. So I'm not going to go into each of those lenses, but I just want to make sure that you don't think I haven't thought about those, because we certainly have, and it's very important when thinking about your programs and thinking about what are your student aims to really have a deep appreciation for the diversity in your student body that you obviously already do, and how what you're doing will be as inclusive and as accessible, of course, as possible. Okay, institutions have aims as well. Recruitment can be a big one, especially in this day and age. Number one reason, I think pretty much across Canada, why students come to post-secondary is to get a job. It is the career clarity and the career connections. So that is part of why they're interested in work-integrated learning specifically. And it can be a very strong recruitment device and nowadays, of course, with demographic changes across the Canadian landscape, our domestic student numbers are going down. We're also looking to recruit more international students. Very, very powerful way to recruit international students is the offer to have Canadian work experience. So again, recruitment is often why institutions are engaging or interested in supporting these kind of endeavors. Retention, Drew mentioned George Koo's work, lots of evidence that talks about experiential learning opportunities that identify the relevance of what students are learning, develop them, the capabilities to help them engage in their subject matter more, builds intrinsic motivation. That retention piece is really big. The pedagogy that's engaging. Many institutions have a strong community engagement mandate or very interested in engaging their communities, and these programs can be one mechanism to do that, as well as engaging with alumni and demonstrating relevance to government and funders through this kind of work. That's often what you hear. That's why the federal government is pumping all of this money into these programs, closing the so-called skills gap, employability. Sometimes governments, depending on, and again, governments are different, right? They're federal, they're provincial, there's local, there are Indigenous governments, there are international governments that you might be engaging with if you're doing international work-integrated learning. And then employers or host organizations. Number one reason that they engage in work-integrated learning is part of their talent management. All the changes that we're seeing coming in the future of work, one of the number one issues, there's climate change, there's disruption, political disruption, and there's the war for talent. It's the number one thing that companies, organizations are really worried about. With demographic shifts, and certainly in the Western world, large numbers of people getting ready to retire, the gray tsunami and all that, who are they going to get on board? How are they going to get those people on board? And it's the war for talent. So talent management, recruitment is a big reason why employers, industry, organizations are engaging in these activities. Lots of organizations are very interested in our research, in our technologies, in our ideas, and see students coming into their workplaces and organizations as ways to bring that information in. They see themselves as learning organizations. They want that infusion of new ideas, new talent, and innovation. And students can be those small disruptive agents that can help organizations innovate and adapt, and many organizations take it on for that reason. Similarly, many organizations want students in their place of business or their employment because it acts as a way to build the capacity within their own staff. They have junior staff, they want them to become better supervisors, they want them to become better project managers, and they often do that by having them supervise students and student projects. So it's a way of building capacity within their own staff. Lots of organizations want work done, obviously, and they get projects done, and they have the students adding value, and many really want to connect with us as post-secondary institutions and are looking for ways to connect, and students are one way to do that. And finally, what are the aims of the educator, us? Well, I think there's probably nothing too surprising in there. The opportunities to connect students and have them really engage in our subject matter, help them develop skills, which not only help them with employability, but do connect, make them better students, better scholars, more motivated, more engaged, better time management, all of those things that help their academic studies as well. Their own personal capabilities, which they're developing, which we want to support them in so that they're just really well-rounded global citizens and critical thinkers. And for those who are very open, an opportunity to have the learning that those students are gaining when they're out on experiences infuse our own curriculum so that we too become learning organizations and we too benefit from the learning that these students are gaining and the exposure they have to different contexts, and that helps us stay relevant and fresh. So that's the first circle, the aims. The second circle are actions. So what actions do we need to be taking to help realize those aims? So this is the second dimension of the quality framework. And the way that we think about these, you have to kind of think about them in three dimensions. There are actions that need to be taken before, during, and after. So there's a temporal domain, which we all know, all of us who are doing this work. But the other acronym that we use is PAIR, because there are actions that should relate to supporting the pedagogy, the experience, the assessment, and the reflection. And PAIR, those four components are the four pillars of high-impact experiential learning, all coming from the literature. You got to have some pedagogy going on. The experiences have to be meaningful and substantial. There needs to be meaningful assessment that's linked to the curriculum and supporting learning outcomes, and there needs to be critical reflection. And so you had this pre-conference workshop yesterday on the importance of critical reflection. So PAIR. See, I told you, I do everything in words that I can remember. So PAIR. And that's how these things, before, during, and after, in PAIR, is how to structure and think about the actions that are needed to realize your aims. So I'm going to run through a few of them very high level. So if we think about pedagogy, what kind of pedagogy needs to be set up before an experience or work integrated learning? Obviously, there needs to be some course content. Students need to be knowing stuff and applying stuff. So there's a course content or technical skill development potentially. And there's usually pedagogy required to help them be successful on that experience. So there's some experiential pedagogy that's required as well as whatever the course content might be. So those are some pedagogical considerations. There's also pedagogy during the experience. So there might be an ongoing thread of training that goes on or connection to the curriculum that goes on throughout the experience. So for example, at the University of Waterloo, we have a program, a unit called WATPD, Waterloo Professional Development. And every student who's on a work term chooses, and they must choose, and it's an academic credit, a professional development course that they take while they're on their work term. So they'll go to the work term, they'll realize, oh gee, I want to take something around conflict management, or I want to take something around communications, or whatever. We have a set of about 13 different PD courses. And they take those courses, about 20 to 25 hours worth of work that they take, earning credit online while they're on their work experience. So that's an example of pedagogy that's delivered during their work experience, during their work integrated learning, that helps them continue to develop and learn as a result of their experience and ties it together. And then of course there's pedagogy after the experience. How are we taking the learning from that, bringing it back into the students' understanding of their curriculum, what they're doing next, what it might mean for their academic progression or their personal development. And sometimes that can take the form of a capstone, for example, as a way to have pedagogy at the very end, not only of each experience, but of a program, for example. So those are some pedagogical implications. And I realize these are all lovely little bullet points, and then every single one of them could result in, you know, a committee or a subcommittee or a working group that could go on for about 3 years. I'm painfully aware of this fact. But I've just written them as nice, easy bullet points because, you know, really, what could go wrong? Okay. Then there's the E for experiences. And again, actions around experience before, during, and after. And you probably can't read this slide very well. But in this case, I have broken these down by stakeholders. Because you can also, every one of these can be broken by stakeholders. So if we go back to pedagogy for a minute, the host organization may also have a set of training pedagogy that they are wanting to deliver for the students, right? So it may also be happening there. The students themselves may have some self-directed training or realizing that they want to delve into certain subject matter that isn't part of any curriculum, but they're just pursuing it on their own. So each stakeholder group may also have their own, but I just showed one from really the institutional perspective. But in the experience perspective, if we think about actions beforehand and we look at the student perspective, well, first of all, we need to find the students, we need to identify them, they need to be qualified for the experience, they need to be prepared for it. So those are some examples of experiences actions related to the experience before it happens for the student. Then similarly for the host organization, they need to be identified, they need to be vetted, they need to be prepared, right, before an experience happens. And for the institution, we need to have it very clear in our minds, what are we looking for, why are we looking for that, how does that work, how are we making those connections? Is it the kind of thing that students are running around and making those connections for themselves? Are we facilitating in some way, and what does that way look like, and why are we doing it, and who's in charge of that? And who's paying for the infrastructure for all of that? Or are we just saying, hey, 100% for everybody, off you go? And then our employers, our community hosts are running around with inquiries from 25 different students from all these different programs, wondering what on earth is going on. So there are a lot of implications around setting the stage for these experiences in a quality way with the good outcomes. Similarly, during it, there are lots of things that have to happen under each experience. The student needs to be ready to engage in an ethical manner, in a responsible manner, in a way that is truly treating the experience as a learning opportunity. And similarly, the host organization. No one's interested in host organizations that's looking for cheap labor or someone who they can use in a way that's unethical, that isn't where they're not considering themselves and taking on the role as educator and educator partner. And similarly then after the experience, what's happening after? Is it a one-off? Is it something that there are sustainable relationships that are built, sustainable mechanisms in place to ensure that these are long-term relationships that continue to bear fruit for the students and ourselves? With me so far? Okay. Then assessment. This is such a big one. I've actually had multi-day institutes around assessment just in and of itself, because it is so difficult to wrap one's head around assessment. Again, before, during, and after, what is it we're assessing? Why? And how? And who? And when? And it's very complicated when you throw it into a situation where you have another partner in the educational activity, which is the host organization or the employer. And they are all very different, and they don't necessarily have any kind of training in this work, and they have different kinds of work or experiences that they're making available to their students, and then they have this huge array of different kinds of students. There's just so much variability in there that for academics and educators who are used to being able to assess in a rather controlled and contained way, this is just makes your head explode, this kind of assessment. How to do it in a way that's actually meaningful. And again, I think that's the point, is that what are we trying to do here? Is it to create a grade? Is it to do a pass-fail? Is it to really assess learning for the purposes of personal development? So the approach that we're taking at the University of Waterloo is to step back and say, and we've been in this business for 62 years, I just want to say, it's not a new endeavor. But we are stepping back and saying, okay, what are we doing with respect to assessment here? Is it about student performance? The student showed up and was good and behaved and didn't break anything, and then they went home, and that's what we're assessing? Or are we assessing something in addition to that? And when I look at this, I think about, and the video showed this nicely, our students and graduates are currently we are all in, and are graduating into that VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I'm sure you've all heard that term. So, the future of work and learning, what are the capabilities that our students are going to be needing to be able to not only function, but to succeed, to flourish, to thrive in what is a very volatile, uncertain world? What are the talents they are going to need? So at the University of Waterloo, we are just finalizing our future-ready talent framework, we're calling it, about the learning outcomes that we feel that the students can obtain through the array of work-integrated learning and experiential education and cooperative education at the university that will help them develop those talents that they are going to need to be successful in the future of work and learning. And that's the approach we're taking as a framework for assessment that will then be used for assessing every experience within every context, whether it's an undergraduate student or a graduate student, whether it's in Canada or whether it's abroad, or whatever the context happens to be. So that is an approach that we're taking, but again, that's easier said than done. How do you set that? Who does it? And how do you get a process in place that is fair and accessible and something that people can do in a legitimate way, so that the results of that really do give feedback to the student for their own personal development, feedback to the institution about what's going on for that learning, and provide meaningful and powerful assessments. Okay. The R in PAIR, reflection, and you've had a pre-conference workshop on critical reflection and how important that is. And reflection, we all know, is absolutely critical. Experience without reflection doesn't really lead to learning. Wasn't that John Dewey? Somebody said that. John Dewey, I think. Yeah, but it's easier said than done. As someone who's been wrestling with this for a long time, reflection is a lot easier said than done. How do we train ourselves to do it? Do we even know what we're talking about? And are we training ourselves to guide reflection? Are we reflective? That's a start. And then are we trained to do that? Are we trained to facilitate that? How are we setting the stage for our students? How are we setting the stage for our host organizations and employers? Most people hear the word reflection and they immediately, their eyes glaze over. They think, oh, it's some waffle waffle journal thing. But that could be a mechanism, but really, how do we develop these important, critical habits of mind where a person is really critically self-reflective, really honestly doing self-assessment, really honestly thinking about where they are and where they want to be in the world and how they want to show up in the world, and really taking an opportunity to be thoughtful, because those are the skills we need in the future of work and learning. That is what's going to, those habits of mind are going to set the stage for the kind of lifelong learning behaviors that our students and graduates are going to need in order to be adaptive and resilient for the future. And that starts now with developing these really legitimate reflective practices. And experiential, work-integrated learning, these opportunities can really help them develop those habits of mind. We all know how difficult reflection is. It's hard work. That's why most students, I'm sure yours don't, but most students just, flip right past it, because it's actually really hard to do it in a really honest and legitimate way, but is, of course, extremely powerful. So what are the mechanisms to set it up in advance and during and after? And again, at the University of Waterloo, we're looking at, first of all, the Future Ready Talent Framework as a way to help ground some of that reflection. So development of talent, and what evidence do you have about that? What does that mean? So what? Now what? Those kinds of conversations with students so that they can really personalize that reflection and think about it in a very concrete and tangible way. But then also, really, the so what, now what pieces. We want these young people to be really effective when they graduate. We want them to be applying their brilliance and their hard work and their commitment to these very difficult problems that we're all facing. We need them. We need them to do this. We need reflective graduates who are very thoughtful in order to be able to grapple with some of these very complex problems that they're facing right now. And so this reflection before, during, and after is so incredibly, incredibly important and really difficult. All right, so we've got the, we've got the actions. PAIR, before, during, and after, stakeholders. Now the third circle is achievements. This is the third A in the AAA framework. And really the achievements circle is you've got your aim, you've accomplished your actions, so how do you know? What achievements, how can you measure it? How can you demonstrate it? What achievements will demonstrate that you've been successful in your actions, which has meant that you've moved the dial on the aims you've had? That's what this section is about. So some pedagogical achievements might be, and I'm sure you all have great ideas from your own context, how are you going to measure success around pedagogy, your pedagogical actions? What might that look like? It could be that you've got all sorts of different kinds of curriculum that you've now developed that deal with the before, during, and after. You may have done some extensive curriculum mapping across programs and have identified where experiential or work-integrated learning fits in and how it is integrated. It's not just an activity, but it's integrated to support the overall objectives of your program or the degree, whatever it is that the students are studying. And maybe that's a way that you're measuring pedagogical achievement. It could be some people are counting the numbers of courses and the types of courses and are creating inventories and audits How many are doing that at their institutions, audits right now of the kinds of experiential learning or work integrated learning? Yeah, so that's one way to demonstrate what's happening across the pedagogy. It could be that another way of demonstrating achievements are different kinds of courses or different kinds of accomplishments or certificates or training that are being created in order to fill some of those gaps that you're learning about as the students come in and out of these experiences and when you engage with community and employer organizations. So those might be some examples of how to measure pedagogical achievements. Experience achievements, this again, people are counting the numbers of students, where they are located, what kind of work they're doing, or what kind of experiences they're having, what kind of organizations they're working with, nonprofit or types or industries or whatever they happen to be doing, rural versus urban, all sorts of ways to count or look at depending on your aims. Numbers and counts. There are also quality indicators such as satisfaction surveys that one can get from the host organizations as well as students themselves. How are they measuring the quality, the satisfaction they have? So at the University of Waterloo, we've started in the last couple of years a rate my work term evaluation. So students rate the quality of the work term based on a number of indices, and then that's something that is shared so we get a better sense of the quality. That's another way to measure experience. Assessment achievements, this can come with having a set of common, for example, if there was a set of common learning outcomes for experiential, this is another way to look at measuring achievements. Is there a way for students to track the development of their skills or their accomplishments or their learning and track that for each experience, maybe track that over time, so that they can note their own progress individually? I sort of think of the fitness tracker analogy. Their own experience individually, where is it they want to go, how do they fill those gaps? So it's a way for them, through assessment, being able to track that. And then also programmatically, what's going on with a specific discipline area or faculty or program, again around learning and development and the assessment and how well they're doing. So that's another way of looking at measuring outcomes or achievements. And then reflection. We're looking at, I don't know, for those who do cooperative education or other forms of work integrated learning, often a final reflective device is something called a work to report or a final report where students reflect. Well, I'm not sure what your students think of it, but I'd say many students, it's not their most favorite activity. But for some, they do like it. We love those students very much. So why is that? We all do it. We all have some kind of final reflective activity, and they all do it, and they hand it in, and we mark it, and we think, oh, God, why aren't they more reflective? And I think that it's connecting these things, these pieces all together. How does it connect to their own particular learning path? How does it connect to that experience? And what difference does it make? Because we know, I made the comment that many students are coming into higher ed for jobs, but they're also coming in because they want to make a difference. They want to make a meaningful difference. They want to be equipped to do something. Most of them really do. So how are we using that desire, that motivation in these reflective achievements that we're asking them to do? Do we have a way of knowing? Of all the students who did an experiential at my institution last year, this was the difference they made. Has anyone done that? That would be cool. That would be an interesting impact outcome achievement. Because I think also my own personal bias, having been in this business for over 25 years, is that we really, really, really underestimate the impact our students make in organizations all over the world. They contribute big time, and they do really, really beautiful things. And how do we talk about that? We have, usually all of us have gorgeous videos of a student who's, changed some code somewhere and it meant something important happened, which it did. But I think every student actually, that's why employers and host organizations tolerate a lot of the silliness that we throw at them. Just going to say that. Because they want those ideas, they want that fresh energy, they want those bright things in their places of business or organizations to help them solve important problems. whether it's the food bank downtown or it's Toyota. That's why they're bringing the students on board. And what are we doing about that? Do we know anything about that? Do we know anything about the impact our students are making? And I think that's a really interesting new area to be exploring. And I think this is another way that we can talk about the work that we do and the work that we care so much about. Is that it's about more than work. It's about more than getting a job and employability and looking good for governments. It really is about equipping our students. So first and foremost, they are equipped. We're doing our job by them. We're being responsible to them about the future of work and learning. And it's also about really unleashing their capacity to make a difference right now in their students, as well as equipping them for the future. So there's the model. It's about articulating the aims, accomplishing the actions, and assessing the achievements. See, all A words, hey? Really good. And then the final piece are quality improvement or quality assurance processes. Because this isn't just a one-off. You don't just like do a handbook or something, then you're done. It really is about what are you doing to continually improve? And that's part of that quality improvement, that continuous improvement thinking around this work. So yes, we've given thought to whether or not we could ever come up with a rating scale, but we're not quite there yet. It's more really, right now we're at the quality improvement piece, what that might look like. But of course, we have been influenced by the national body, the Canadian Association, does have the world's only cooperative education accreditation process. So nowhere else in the world is there an accreditation process for the form of work-integrated learning, which is cooperative education. And the Canadian body has been doing this for 40 years? 40 years, probably. So there's a long history of doing this kind of accreditation in this space. And so there is some thinking about whether we would want to look at whether there's anything in that might be helpful for other forms of work-integrated learning. So that's where that rating thing is coming from. But continuous improvement, I think that this is where each institution, each program needs to think about what mechanisms are in place or could be in place for continuously helping the students improve. So that gets back to that concept of, is there a way to track their progress? They can identify where they're at, where they need to go, how to fill those gaps, that kind of continuous improvement at the student level. What about at the program level? You know, the key word in work-integrated learning is the word integrated. I'd say it's probably the weakest in the whole model, is how is that learning really integrated? How is it really being fed back into some kind of continuous loop so that there is actually ongoing curricular renewal and improvement? And sometimes it happens beautifully, but I would say typically, systemically, it's not necessarily happening. What about continuous improvement processes for all those 5 stakeholders? What are we doing on a regular basis to engage our communities appropriately, our employers appropriately? I made a bit of an off-the-cuff comment, but our employers, our communities, they don't want 20 different faculty members showing up with different great ideas about what they could do in their place, their organizations. And they certainly don't want 20 different assessment forms, little processes that they have to fill out, little checklists that somebody wants, different timing of this and that. Now, I'm not saying we all do everything all the same way, but I really think as we get into this space, and part of this quality improvement piece is how do we make a bit of an effort to get our act together, especially as it relates to how we engage with our external stakeholders. They actually are really busy. They have jobs to do. They have stuff to do. And they are taking on our students. They are helping us with our educational mission in a way that is really important, and we have to help them help us and not just assume that they're going to be delighted to have a group of 20 students show up and do some kind of project about some issue that they're concerned about. I think another really big opportunity for continuous improvement is the use of data and data analytics. This is also an area that I don't think has been well, I haven't used it as much as I would like to. Maybe there's some great examples here. But some data analytics around what kind of student can benefit at what stage in their
program and how might that look? That sort of analysis, I think, is something that we haven't done as much as we could do, and now we're in the place of being able to do more of that as there are more data tools, big data tools and analytical tools. So I think that would be really interesting, as well as using data around some of these large outcomes that we can start collecting and reporting out on and showing different connections than perhaps we've showed in the past. So we get past the place of saying, oh, we have 92% of our students in these programs and it's just a numbers game, but it's actually being able to dig into some of these other value propositions more deeply. That is the end of this presentation, and I do realize I've gone through things very quickly. I'd encourage you to read the white paper and to reach out to any of us at the University of Waterloo that have been involved in this project, and we're continuing to evolve the project. But in the meantime, very much appreciate your attention, and thank you.